I used to believe I was just a supporting character in my own family. A faint shadow in a house always filled with laughter, pride, and joy. Though none of it was ever meant for me. By the time I was old enough to understand the world around me, all the important roles in my family had already been taken. My eldest sister, Lauren, 10 years older than me, was my parents' pride and joy, with her perfect grades and outstanding achievements in the debate team. My second sister, Emily, 8 years older, was the school's star athlete, always shining in her volleyball uniform. And me, Rose? I was the youngest child, a late addition, someone who seemed to have arrived too late to have a place in my own family's story. My parents were never cruel to me, but they never truly paid attention either. They were always busy talking about Lauren and Emily, about their grades, their awards, the incredible opportunities awaiting them. When Lauren received her acceptance letter to a prestigious law school, my parents threw a huge party, calling all their friends and relatives to celebrate. When Emily was named captain of the volleyball team, they were so proud that they hung her photo right in the middle of the living room. As for me, I once brought home a painting I made, hoping it would be placed on the fridge like Lauren and Emily's childhood drawings had been. But it was pushed aside to make room for a newspaper article about Lauren's latest achievement. Our house was in a quiet suburb of Ohio, with spacious yards and white picket fences. From the outside, we looked like the perfect picture of a middle-class American family, a happy couple with 3 beautiful, accomplished daughters. But inside, I felt more like a guest than an actual member of the family. I wasn't the brilliant child my parents could brag about. I wasn't the star athlete who naturally drew attention. Maybe that's why I learned independence at an early age. I didn't wait for anyone to help me with my homework. I didn't expect anyone to ask about my day. I was used to eating dinner in silence while my family enthusiastically discussed Lauren and Emily's successes. I was used to picking out my own clothes, because, unless it was for a special occasion, my mother would forget I needed anything at all. But the most painful thing wasn't the indifference, it was the comparisons. Rose, why don't you work as hard as Lauren? Look at Emily. Being athletic will help you be more active. I heard these words so often they stopped surprising me. I wasn't Lauren. I wasn't Emily. But in my parents' eyes, I was just a dull, failed attempt at being as exceptional as my sisters. So, I stopped trying to be part of the family in the way they wanted me to be. If they had already decided I was a shadow, then I would become one. I retreated into my own world, one where I didn't have to compete for attention. I accepted it. Or at least I thought I had. Until everything changed. I learned that if you have no expectations, you won't be disappointed. When I was younger, I had tried to get Lauren and Emily's attention. I followed them around, wanting to play with them, wanting to hear their stories about the world beyond our home. But they always had more important things to do. Lauren, with her sharp mind and ambitions, was always buried in books or debate meetings. Emily, energetic and social, spent her time with her volleyball team, parties, and the boys who adored her. And me? I was just the little sister left behind. Once, when I was about 7, I tried to join Emily and her friends. I brought my favorite doll, hoping they'd let me play with them. Emily barely glanced at me before sighing. Rose, you're too old for dolls. Stop following me, go find friends your own age. Her friends laughed, and I felt like someone had slammed a door in my face, leaving me outside alone. Eventually, I stopped trying. I learned to be independent. I did my homework alone. I played alone. I read books, wrote in my journal, and found comfort in things that didn't require anyone else's approval. And then one day, I realized I was truly alone. When Lauren was accepted into Columbia Law School, my family exploded with joy. My parents opened a bottle of wine, invited friends over, and spent an entire week celebrating. I sat at the dinner table, idly twirling my fork, watching them laugh and talk, without anyone even noticing I was there. I didn't blame Lauren. But I wished, just once, someone had turned to me and asked how I felt. 2 years later, Emily received a full athletic scholarship to a big university in California. By then I was 10, and I fully understood that I had no place in moments like these. This time, I didn't wait to be acknowledged. While my family threw another celebration, I quietly retreated to my room, opened my notebook, and wrote. Tomorrow will be no different from today, and today was no different from yesterday. When Lauren left for college, her room was left untouched. Mom carefully cleaned it, reminding me not to disturb anything. The bed remained neatly made, her desk still covered with law books, and her framed awards hung proudly on the wall. When Emily left, her room became a shrine as well. Her volleyball jersey was displayed, her medals gleamed under the light. And my room? It was just a regular bedroom. Nothing special. No one cared if I rearranged things. No one would notice if I disappeared one day. So I continued living as a shadow. A person who left no trace. Until I began to understand the truth. If I didn't create value for myself, no one else would. I started reading more, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to understand the world. I focused on my studies, not to impress my parents, but because I saw it as my only ticket out of this place. I stopped seeking validation from my family. I started seeking a way to escape. I don't know exactly when this plan formed in my mind. Maybe it was on an autumn afternoon, as I walked past two bedrooms frozen in time, while no one noticed I was growing up too. Maybe it was on a winter night, as I sat by my window, watching the warm glow from the neighbors' houses, imagining a life somewhere else. Somewhere I wouldn't be forgotten. But whenever it was, I knew one thing. I wasn't staying here forever. I would leave. I would stop being invisible. I would find a life that belonged to me. I just didn't know that in order to gain my freedom, I would have to lose so much. Lauren got married when I was 15. It was a grand fairy tale wedding. I stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching her glow in her white dress, surrounded by love and celebration. People called her name, hugged her, toasted to her future, while I remained in the background, forgotten once again. But just a year later, my family had even bigger news. Lauren was pregnant. My parents were overjoyed. Mom cried tears of happiness. Dad called every relative to share the good news. And when the first grandchild, Ethan, was born, I truly believed it was a miracle. The first time I held him, I felt a joy unlike anything I had known. Ethan was small, warm, and soft, his bright eyes locking onto mine as his tiny fingers curled around mine, as if I was his whole world. "She's going to be a wonderful aunt," Mom smiled, patting my shoulder. And I believed it. At first I was eager to visit Lauren's house, to play with Ethan, to hear his laughter. For the first time, I felt like I had a place in the family. But I was naive. I didn't realize that this joy wasn't just about family bonds. It was about a role I was being assigned. Just months after Ethan was born, Lauren started calling me more often. At first, the favors were small. "Rose, can you watch Ethan for a bit? I just need to run to the store." "Rose, I'm so exhausted. Can you come over and play with the baby for a bit?" I happily agreed. I thought, there was nothing wrong with helping my sister. But soon, the requests turned into demands I couldn't refuse. "Rose, I have plans with my friends this Saturday. You can watch Ethan for me, right?" "Rose, I need a night off with my husband. Come babysit Ethan." "Rose, you're free anyway, why are you saying no?" I didn't realize when I had become Ethan's full-time babysitter. Every weekend I was expected to take care of him while Lauren went out for dinners, spa days, and relaxing breaks I had never had for myself. And things only got worse when Emily had a baby too. My niece Sophie was born 2 years after Ethan, and suddenly I wasn't just watching one child, I was watching two. My afternoons were no longer spent reading books or enjoying quiet moments alone. Instead, I was changing diapers, mixing formula, and soothing crying babies to sleep. While my friends went to the movies or hung out at the mall, I was stuck in the living room with two screaming toddlers fighting over a doll. And the worst part? No one saw anything wrong with it. The first time I protested, I hesitantly told my mom that I had my own plans. She simply gave me a disapproving look. Family helps each other, Rose. What could be more important than supporting your sisters? Lauren chuckled, as if I had just said something ridiculous. You're always home anyway, what's the big deal about helping out a little? A little. A little turned into every week. Every week turned into every weekend. Every weekend turned into whenever they needed me. I had no time for school activities. I turned down invitations from friends, knowing there would always be a last-minute call from Lauren or Emily. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until one day, I sat in the library, staring at my math homework, unable to solve even a simple equation. I was too tired. I wanted out. But how do you escape something that your entire family sees as your duty? I started planning my freedom when I was 16. I knew that if I wanted to escape this life, I needed a way out that no one could stop me from taking. And the only thing that could guarantee that was a college acceptance, somewhere far away. I threw myself into my studies as if it was my only means of survival. While Lauren and Emily enjoyed their family lives, while my parents doted on their grandchildren, I buried myself in books. I spent hours in the library, finished assignments early, and memorized every SAT question type. I no longer had time for free babysitting. And when the calls came asking for help, I had only one response. I'm busy studying. Of course, no one liked it. Lauren sighed whenever I refused. Emily complained that I was being selfish. My mom shook her head and said I was too focused on myself. But I didn't care. I knew that no one else was going to look out for me. Except me. And then, the day I had been waiting for finally arrived, my acceptance letter from New York University. I had applied to several top schools, but NYU was the one I truly wanted. Not because of its reputation. Not because of its programs. But because it was nearly 800 miles from home, far enough that no one could demand I come back at a moment's notice. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. And when I saw the words, "Congratulations, you have been accepted to NYU with a scholarship," I cried. But I wasn't allowed to celebrate for long. A few days later, my mom called me into the living room. The air in the house felt suffocatingly tense. Lauren and Emily were already there, sitting with my parents, as if they were waiting for me to be put on trial. I knew immediately that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. "Rose, we need to talk about your college plans," my mom said. Her tone so serious, it sent a chill down my spine. My dad nodded, placing a stack of papers on the table. "We've been thinking about this a lot. There are some great local universities with just as strong programs as NYU. You could stay home and save money. And most importantly..." Lauren immediately jumped in. She could help with the kids. I looked around the room, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Emily smiled, as if trying to make it sound like a reasonable suggestion. "We just think it would be better if you stayed close to home. Daughters should stay near family, right? You can study, and still help out with Ethan and Sophie. It just makes sense." "Makes sense, for who?" A fire ignited in my chest. "No," I said firmly. My mom frowned. "You need to think about the family, Rose, it's not just about you." "And who's thinking about me?" I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. The room fell silent. I looked at each of them and realized that none of them saw a problem with what they were doing. They genuinely believed that keeping me home, forcing me to sacrifice my future to take care of their kids, was completely reasonable. And then, a voice spoke from the doorway. "I think Rose should go." All heads turned toward the speaker. My grandmother. She stood there, her silver hair neatly brushed, her sharp yet kind eyes locking onto mine. "You have a wonderful opportunity, Rose. And your grandfather always wanted his education fund to go toward his granddaughters. If NYU is where you want to be, then that's where you should go." I nearly cried at her words. My parents looked uncertain. Lauren and Emily were clearly unhappy. But no one dared argue with my grandmother. I knew then that if it weren't for her, I would never have had this chance. A few months later, I left. For the first time in my life, I walked out of that house without looking back. Freedom has a distinct scent. The smell of new books in a university library. The aroma of morning coffee before class. The crisp air of bustling streets where I could walk freely, without anyone calling my name to ask for favors. I loved my life in New York. I loved how this city didn't care who I was or expect me to carry responsibilities I never asked for. For the first time, I was living for myself, not for anyone else. I enrolled in classes I was passionate about. I participated in thought-provoking discussions. I made friends who knew nothing about me being the unpaid babysitter of my family. Each day, I felt myself becoming a person of my own. Not weak, not used. But a Rose who could shape her own destiny. But even 800 miles away, I couldn't fully escape them. The holidays arrived faster than I expected. And 3 weeks before Christmas my mother called. Her voice was unusually sweet. "The whole family misses you, Rose. Everyone's excited for you to come home. Ethan and Sophie keep asking about Aunt Rose." I gripped my phone tightly, staring out the dorm window. The city outside was alive with movement, twinkling Christmas lights lining every street. A part of me wanted to say no, to stay and enjoy a winter break without the weight of family obligations. But another part reminded me that, despite everything, they were still my family. I sighed. "All right, I'll come home." I didn't know I had just made a terrible mistake. I stepped into the house on Christmas Eve, just as the season's first snowstorm began blanketing the driveway. And immediately, I realized I was trapped. The living room was filled with screaming children, toys scattered all over the floor. Not just Ethan and Sophie, but cousins' kids, family friends' kids, children of people I didn't even know. My mother appeared from the kitchen, beaming. "Rose, sweetheart, you're home. I need you for a bit. The kids are waiting for you." I froze. "Waiting for me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lauren stepped out of the hallway carrying her 2-year-old son. "They were so excited to see you, Rose. We have a lot to handle tonight, so you can help out, right?" I looked around and saw it. The adults were preparing to enjoy a peaceful Christmas dinner, while I was being assigned to babysit over a dozen kids. Rage surged inside me so fast I nearly dropped my suitcase. But I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "No." The entire room seemed to freeze. My mother stopped arranging cookies. Lauren paused, mid-step. Emily turned to look at me, confused. "What did you say?" my mother asked, her voice laced with disbelief. I swallowed the lump in my throat, for the first time feeling completely in control of the situation. I said no. "I'm not babysitting tonight. I'm not this family's nanny." A heavy silence settled over the room. Emily's mouth fell open. "But, who's going to watch the kids?" I shrugged, scanning their faces. "Not my problem." I saw it then. The panic flashing across their expressions. Like they had never even considered this scenario. A Christmas where they had to care for their own children. My mother shook her head, regaining composure. "Rose, you can't be this selfish. This is family. Family helps each other." I scoffed. "I've done enough. From now on, if you have kids, you take care of them." And with that I grabbed my suitcase and walked upstairs, ignoring the chaos behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had taken control of my own life. Christmas dinner was different. At least, for my family. I came downstairs after the meal had already started. No kids clinging to me. No diapers. No screaming. For the first time in years, I sat at the adult table instead of being shoved off with the children. No one said anything when I served myself, poured my own wine, and ate my meal at my own pace, like a normal, independent adult. But I could feel their eyes on me. Stunned. Uncomfortable. And, worse, furious. No one enjoyed dinner that night. No one knew how to react when the burden of childcare was no longer mine to carry. Lauren was the first to break the silence. "You've changed a lot since going to college," she said sweetly, but there was venom beneath her words. I set down my fork and met her gaze. "You mean I stopped letting everyone take advantage of me?" Emily frowned. Take advantage? Rose, what are you even talking about? This is family. We help each other. I let out a quiet laugh, swirling my wineglass in my hand. Help? I echoed. I don't remember anyone ever helping me. But I do remember all the times I had to cancel my own plans to babysit for you. I remember being called selfish whenever I wanted time for myself. And I especially remember when you tried to force me to go to college nearby, just so I could continue being your free nanny. The room grew even heavier. My father set his utensils down, his voice lower now. Rose, you're overreacting. No one forced you to do anything, you just had more free time, so helping out made sense. I let out a sharp laugh. More free time? Do you even know how hard I worked to get into NYU? How many hours I spent studying to earn that scholarship? And do you two remember how many times I told you I had plans, but you forced me to cancel anyway? Lauren crossed her arms, her voice turning cold. This is disappointing. Mom and Dad paid for your college, and this is how you treat your family on Christmas? I laughed, loud and bitter, feeling truly fearless for the first time. They paid for my college? I repeated, turning to my parents. Did you ever tell them who actually paid for my tuition? The room went silent. Lauren's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Emily looked at me like she was finally starting to understand. I leaned back in my chair, speaking slowly and clearly. It was Grandma. My mother stiffened, and my father clenched his jaw. She used Grandpa's education fund to help me go to school, just like she did for you both. But, I guess you conveniently forgot about that. Lauren's mouth opened, then quickly closed. She recovered fast though, and shrugged. Fine, she said flatly. If you don't need this family anymore, don't expect any help from us in the future. I nodded. That's perfectly fine with me. The air was suffocating, but I didn't care anymore. I had said everything I needed to say. I stood up, leaving my barely touched plate behind. Rose, where are you going? My mother called after me. I'm going back to New York, I replied without turning around. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the ground in a heavy white blanket. I pulled my suitcase behind me, each step through the freezing snow severing the last remaining ties I had to that house. Before getting into the car, I pulled out my phone. Blocked my mother's number? Blocked my father's. Blocked Lauren's and Emily's too. With each press of my finger, I felt like I was snapping the chains that had held me captive for so many years. I started the car, and this time I truly left, without anyone being able to pull me back. 2 months later, on a bitterly cold winter morning, I looked out my dorm window and couldn't believe my eyes. Down in the campus parking lot, standing among the hurried students rushing past, were my father, my mother, and Emily. I yanked the curtain shut, my heart pounding. I didn't know why they were here, but I had no interest in hearing another lecture about family responsibilities or sibling duty. They had lost their control over me the moment I walked out on Christmas Eve. My phone vibrated, a message from my mother. Rose, we know you're there, please come talk to us. We're not here to argue. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I could ignore them, let them stand in the cold until they gave up. But a small part of me, the part that had once longed for their approval, still wanted to know why they had come. I grabbed my coat, walked downstairs, and found them huddled near a small cafe on campus. Emily saw me first. She looked worn down, no longer the picture-perfect put-together sister I remembered. Rose, she called, as if afraid I would run away. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. Why are you here? My mother stepped forward, her eyes tired but more sincere than I had ever seen them. We need to talk. I said nothing, just turned and walked into the cafe. They followed. We sat at a corner table. No one spoke at first. Finally, my father broke the silence. We've thought a lot about things since you left, he said, tapping his fingers against his coffee cup. And we realize now that we were wrong. I looked up, skepticism clear in my eyes. Emily nodded, speaking slowly. We took advantage of you, Rose. We got used to you always being there, helping with the kids, handling everything. without ever stopping to think that you had a life of your own. My mother clasped her hands together on the table, looking down before meeting my gaze. I'm sorry, Rose. Truly sorry. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. We assumed that you helping was just natural, but I see it now. It was never your responsibility. I remained silent. Everything I had once desperately wanted to hear from them, the acknowledgement, the apology, the understanding, was finally being said. But, was it enough? What about Lauren? I asked, bitterness still lacing my voice. Emily sighed. She still doesn't get it. She thinks you're just going through a phase and that you'll come back eventually. I let out a dry laugh. Then she's going to be very disappointed. My mother nodded, sadness in her eyes. We're not asking you to come back and be who you were before. We just want to start over, the right way this time. I studied them, the people who had once made me feel invisible in my own family. They had hurt me, overlooked me, turned me into their unpaid babysitter without ever considering the cost. But now, at least, they were trying. I set down my coffee, folded my arms, and let out a deep breath. I can't forget everything overnight, but I can try to forgive. My mother reached for my hand, not to ask for anything this time, just as a gesture of sincerity. Okay, Rose, we'll do better. I nodded. But one thing was certain, I would never go back to who I used to be. In the months that followed, things changed. I kept my distance from Lauren. She never reached out, and I didn't either. But I no longer felt angry or hurt about it. I called my mother occasionally, but our conversations were no longer centered around what I could do for others. Emily started taking care of her own children, and when she needed help, she hired a babysitter instead of calling me. And me? I lived my own life. No more weekends consumed by obligation. No more holidays turned into daycare duty. Just me. A Rose who was finally free. Rose's story isn't just about a girl escaping her family's exploitation, it's about reclaiming her self-worth. Too many people, especially within families, are assigned roles they never agreed to, simply because that's just how things are. But sacrifice without appreciation becomes invisible servitude. Rose dared to stand up, to say no, and to take back control of her life. Her story is a powerful reminder that you don't owe anyone your time, energy, or future, especially not those who refuse to respect your boundaries. What do you think about Rose's story? Have you ever found yourself being taken advantage of by family without realizing it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more real-life stories about family, self-discovery, and independence.